Good evening. Does it work? Does it work? Good evening. Hi, my name is Peter Bilak. I'm going to talk tonight about this magazine that we do, Works at Work. And I'll very briefly, just in one slide, introduce myself. My background is graphic design. Especially I work a lot with typography, but I won't talk about any of this traditional design work. In fact, I'll talk about the difference between traditional graphic design work or design work and something else, which this magazine discusses. I'm going to talk about actually designing design, the processes that go beyond the visible, beyond the surface of design. I'll probably stand here so I can see what the slides are. This magazine, it's always very hard for me to define what it is. You know, I tend to think about it as design magazine, but when you say design magazine, people get the wrong idea. They think it has to do with beautifully designed objects made by, which are presented in museums and galleries. And in fact, it's very far from this. I think that it has to do with design, creativity, and inspiration. But again, they are very overused words that lost their original meaning. Design, anything man-made is design. It doesn't need to be made by study designers. It doesn't need to be presented in design shops or design museums. It doesn't need to be made by people with diplomas. Anything man-made, any human creation is basically act of design. Includes a very thoughtful process that, from conceptual phase until materializing it. We tend to use the word design as opposed to something else, as non-design things. But in fact, there's nothing which is non-designed. Anything, there's nature, but even that tends to be designed. And we tend to think also that creativity is exclusive domain of artists and designers. And I'd like to argue for that it is not necessarily only that. Many professions which you wouldn't expect that use a lot of creativity in their daily work, and often in places with limited resources, people use the most creative solutions precisely because there's no other way. They have to be very creative in their work. And I'll talk about this magazine because people think that to make a magazine you need to have good content, and correct. When I started thinking about this magazine over a year ago in the winter 2012, and the first thing was to make a list of subjects that possibly could be turned into subjects. But I'll talk about other things beyond the content. I'll talk about, again, designing the process to make something visible. I'll talk about not only the content, but I'll talk about financing. I'll talk about the distribution and production, and finally, design of the magazine, because there are very important other elements beyond what you really see, and they really infect the whole operation. And I'm very interested in the operations beyond something which is visible. The magazine was launched was presented publicly for the first time in October 2012, so just over less than a year ago. And as it is, we know the situation now that there are a lot of cuts in culture and funding, and what are the alternative methods to fund something is often to look at platforms like Kickstarter, and you may know that Kickstarter is not available in Europe. So first thing we did for the magazine, beyond organizing the content, would be creating our own publishing platform, creating our own payment methods, or creating our own crowdfunding platform to make the magazine possible. It would have to be, it's a project on its own, but it was very worthwhile, which allows us to continue with magazine later. And we're very lucky that, thanks to many of you also, that we managed to pull it off. It was a bit risky because you don't really know how you're going to do it, but we managed in Kickstarter's fashion to raise sufficient amount of money in 30 days. It played by the same rules. If you don't reach the limit, we would refund all the money. And we managed to raise about over 30,000 euro for the first issue, which was fantastic, and allowed us to start and then hopefully continue with the magazine. In the same day when this magazine was announced, and it was 19th of October when we announced this, there was this news. this is a snippet for the news that after 79 years, Newsweek, one of the largest weekly magazine, is going to fold, is going to end their print edition. In a way, it's quite it's nerve-wracking for me, to proposing a new publication on a day when others just close. And I got very curious about what makes it. We know that it's not easy times for publications, but I was curious, what is it exactly that makes it, the decision to close something which then been so successful? And if you read this text, it talks about the fact that Newsweek had 1.5 million subscribers at the point when they decided to close it. So you think like, well, with that 1.5 million subscribers, they cannot, it's not sustainable to operate. Very curious. This is the last print issue which exists. It came out in the last day of December 2012, and after that, Newsweek exists online. There are no more print editions. I looked closely on what happened with them, and just at the day when they closed, they had this many paying subscribers, which is incredible. We would love to have so many subscribers to operate. Of course, we'll never do. Then you wonder, so how on earth it is possible that you would have over 1.5 million subscribers and you still cannot make sustainable operations for a publication? This fact explains it a bit. All these people paid 28 cents per issue, which think well, that doesn't seem like something that can make it sustainable. This, in fact, is less than a shipping cost of sending the magazine from the publisher to the reader. So, the reader doesn't really pay for the magazine, doesn't pay for any of the content. They're paying less than cost on envelope and a shipping service. But someone has made the decision that this is the right price. And why is that? Because none of the revenue directly from subscribers is paying for the magazine. This magazine, Newsweek, has been paid 100% from the advertising. And what happened is obviously that when advertising went down more than 80%, which is out of the control of any of the the publisher or the readers or the editors, the magazine cannot sustain itself. The worst thing is that if you see that all the income, all the revenue comes from advertising, is that you may wonder, who is this magazine made for? Who makes the editorial decisions? Who are they? Is it really made for the readers, or is it really made for advertisers? On average, an average magazine contains over 60% of advertising in the US. Some magazines have it more, some less. And the advertisers have amazingly powerful role. They can choose where to advertise, and they can pressure publishers on what to publish their independent research on and what not. When thinking of this magazine, it was clear to me that we cannot. First, I'm not in a position to emulate any of this. So it's not a model that we could possibly follow. Newsweek doesn't exist anymore in print. We'll try to see how, when we did a successful crowdfunding campaign, how to use the same enthusiasm of the readers. That the readers are the main investors, and that it's a publication made for them. It's not made for anyone else. It's not really made to please advertisers. It is made to be read. It's something that you can hold and cherish and to spend time with. This issue, it has no paid advertising. There are 2 adverts in the back which are exchanges with kind people that helped us, but there's no financial involvement of anyone else besides the readers. All of you really make it possible, and then you make choices. If a project like this continues or not. It is I'm not making a statement that I would be against advertising. And in fact, if the ratio between advertising and editorial content is a reasonable one, I think can be a viable model for publishing. The problem is when the ratio gets out of the hand and the advertising becomes the only model to run a magazine. And there's been a lot of discussion about how print publications have difficulties operating now when the advertising shifts from print to online media. How magazines are lamenting that people are not used to paying for content online. But I would make a larger point. People are not, these same publishers that never made people aware that they never paid for the content in the first place. The advertisers paid for the content, not the readers, which is sad. There are some facts, from last year, which are quite revealing, about it, the ratio or the cost of operations and how they help, publications. And again, there doesn't seem to be any alternative method. Everything is driven to the same model. That what you buy in a shop does not directly go to the publisher. You're only paying for the means to get it. It's almost a filter how you get it from the publisher to the reader, but it's not directly paying for the content. So that's why the reader doesn't really have an active role in the publication. And what we wanted to do is really to give the reader an active role, an engaged role that they can be engaged with the content and with the operation of the magazine. One of the most common questions I received was, why do we do it in print? Why print versus screen? Because again, the trend seems to be that people want to read on screen a lot more. People read on the tablets, on the mobiles, and the print is something which is disappearing, dying, or becoming niche object. Intuitively, I always thought that if I spend so much time in front of my computer, that I would love to, sit down when I can relax, that I can read a print object, which is more finer. You can choose if you want to read it in your bath, and you cannot take your iPad in the bath. You can choose. You can? Well, at your own risk. You can. Well, there are advantages of both, and I wouldn't want to argue for one or the other, because at the end, I almost don't care. I almost don't care because I care about the stories, and this is a container. So what we do is, I'd like to think of this guy. I do some work in India, and these guys are called chaiwalas. The people who deliver tea, and they don't really care about what object you drink your tea. They're serving the content, and they're happy to use the plastic cups, or you can have your own cups, or any other cup that you want. You can get any quantity you want, and you pay for what you use. And this is how we would like to operate as well. This magazine is available in print. It is available as an ebook. It is available online. It is available on a Kindle or an iPad. And you choose how you want to read it, because it is about the content. I was always fascinated by these examples of the natural distribution of goods. How people, again, in situations where there are not many resources, how they operate your business. And one of the inspirations besides the chaiwalas would be the drug dealers. How they operate. This is what we do as well. We provide free samples, so you can get the taste of how it is. You can buy a single article if you want. You can buy a bit. You can pay a bit more. You can get the PDF edition or the ebook edition. And finally, there is also the print edition. And on top of it, there's a combination of both. You can get, which is I think the most valuable one, that you can combine print and screen-based media. Because at the end, then you're using the true potential of publishing today. There's this screen which, if you go on our website, reading on paper, of course, it's great. But then, it's very hard to, if you remember some facts and you want to come back to it, it's very hard to find it again. Digital edition is great for indexing, for tagging, for annotation, for many things. The digital editions are tagged by geolocation, so you can search articles by where the article is taking place. All the names there are tagged, so you can see I'm looking for this article where this and this person is mentioned. You can retrieve it any way if you can. So the way, it supports the print, the screen-based media, it extends the possibilities of what is traditionally possible by print. And I think in combination, it's not making a choice, but in combination, you can do something more. So this is the website where some of the articles are for free, some you have to pay for. This is how articles looks like, and they're fairly readable. They are not meant to. They're designed that they're adapting to any screen size by responsive design. They exist. You see how it can work on different readers, and all readers are supported. From Kindle to the iPads to any format which there is, and this we could do thanks to rethinking also how we want to produce a magazine, because the first thing there was a concept of what kind of magazine I wanted to do. And then I asked my friends, so I haven't been doing much magazine work. I've done one before, and I'll mention it later. And the last magazine I've done was designing Quark Express, and the web design wasn't really out there much. So I said, well, what is a tool to make magazines today? What is a central tool that you can export things for print and screen? And people say, well, there isn't. Like, what do you mean? I mean, people are being all so pessimistic about the future of journalism on print, and there isn't a tool that manages that allows you to manage the content for both screen and print. You have to do it separately. It's ridiculous. Today you should be able to have one single source of content, and that's basically was our work. The second project, besides creating the financing platform, would be to create a publishing platform, something that we would be able to store the content in one central place, and writers, researchers, editors, proofreaders would be able to connect on one central location. And from there, we would control in which way it will go. We would not have to do the proofreading twice in print and screen. We would not have to do everything twice. We would design it there. We would do all the semantic tagging, the hierarchy there, by choosing the level of hierarchy. And these tags then are converted to differently for the iPad, differently for the web, and differently for the screen, for the print. Directly from there, we can export to InDesign, and it maintains the style sheets, and we can comment, and we can keep the text as a living thing which evolves, because I see text as any code, which code needs to be maintained and updated and kept up to date. There are mistakes in it, and you have to come back to it, and this way allows us to keep track of changes. And I think the experience comes really from programming. I work a lot with programmers, and they're very precious about the content, about the code, because that's the most valuable thing you have. And somehow, if I look at our previous magazine, we have our content in Quark Express documents, which are inaccessible today. You just cannot do anything with them. So you need to create something that allows you to do the work. And unfortunately, or fortunately, it's been, the most of the work made in a magazine is the work that you don't really see in a publication. Creating the crowdfunding campaign, which allows us now to, maintain the sales. And then finally, I'll talk about distribution, which is another separate project, again, which you don't really see, but it's crucially, it's a crucial one for making the magazine possible. But of course, any magazine is only as good as the content. So I'll talk briefly, and I'll be joined by a colleague, Anne Miltenberg, to talk about content of the magazine. And it's important to, I'm standing here to talk about it, but it's important to recognize that this work is not work by one person or not by two people. There's a number of people involved to whom I'm very, very thankful for being part of the magazine. Some of them are here, and we'll introduce them later. So these are collaborators for this issue of the magazine, people who contributed to this issue. And these doesn't mention the internal people that they work on it, like me, almost every day. But I'd like to give a good word to Anne, who will present her contribution to the magazine. Anne Miltenberg.
Hi. So when you look at the magazine in terms of content, last year Peter approached me and he said, I'm going to do this magazine, and it's this completely different design magazine because I love reading The New Yorker and I love reading National Geographic, and there's not really a magazine that pulls together that kind of content. And would you be interested in actually selecting stories for this magazine? And I was really interested in that because I've been following Peter for a while. And then he said, we have a spread dedicated in the magazine. We would like to feature short stories. So sure. So these kinds of spreads from other magazines, like mainstream magazines like Vogue, and they have a lot of stuff there. And it's kind of meant as a little bit of an appetizer to the main course. So you could kind of see me as like the accessory girl of Works at Work, I suppose. But what we want to do is we actually want to show ideas. We're not selling stuff. We're really just presenting you with these great ideas from around the world that we hope will make you smile. So we started with this kind of idea that, okay, we'll just do, 7 images, 90 words. And then, of course, you find out that all these stories by themselves, you would like to do an entire article on them on their own. So pretty quickly, now we have 2 spreads with 300 words per item. And we needed a name for the section, and in line of what the magazine was about, we were thinking about objects, and we came up with the name Artifacts. And an artifact is basically the name for any object that was made by man that has kind of a historical or cultural value, like spearheads or little objects of fat ladies in ceramics. So we went for the name Artifact. So basically what we're doing here is we're collecting these ideas that we're giving shape by people in all kinds of indigenous ways. So they don't have to be designers. They can be cooks or housewives or whatever. And they're basically solving problems. They can be world problems or very small problems in everyday life. So for this issue, for instance, you'll be reading about the Egyptian democratic government's first design challenge last year after the revolution was to actually design ballots for the population where 30% is illiterate. So how can you be a democracy if you're not allowing 30% of the population to cast their vote? So they came up with this really smart system of giving every politician a little icon, supposedly randomly, of either a camel or a toaster or a gun, and you can find them on the ballot, which is a great idea. And actually, it originated in India, but it worked well for them. Then, for instance, Chinese scientists were really creative about how they could actually work with pandas to reintroduce them to the wild. And what you see here is a kind of example of unexpected creativity from scientists, and it has a really high Monty Python factor, which I really love. And as you can tell, they could use some fashion school maybe to really get the volume going. But it's about the idea. And Michael Rakovich, who's an American artist, and he designed these parasite shelters for homeless people that are made from Ziploc bags. And he actually uses the warm air that comes out of the vents in the US to create these shelters, which is a beautiful idea. And I hope someone will take them into production. And actually every homeless person that he works with, they get their own design, and they choose things like, I want something that resembles Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars, and they have their whole personal story connected to it. And what's also interesting for the magazine is that we really try to have a balance between digital and analog. There's a lot of tech stuff out there that, really claims to change the world. And of course, that's true to a certain extent. But what we're looking for is stuff where you can see beyond the technology. You can really see the added value for people. So Blind Square is a really good example of an app that actually uses the feedback that seeing people put into Foursquare. So when you review a restaurant or when you say this is a good store, Blind Square pulls in this data, and blind people can actually use it to navigate through the city. So now when they're walking past that restaurant that other people said this is a great restaurant, they know they're at that great restaurant, and this really adds a great value to their life. Another thing that we're still working on is how do we make a decision of what to put in the magazine in terms of new and hot and trending, and actually maybe a little bit older, but also still very relevant. So, for instance, Daan Roosgaarde is this incredibly famous designer now in the Netherlands. He's going to be at Zomergasten, and he's going to be the guy that we're really going to look up to for the next 10 years, probably, or maybe longer. And this project that he did, Smart Highway, is an example of that. But we know that in Holland, it's already been published quite a lot. But since the magazine is actually global, oh, we have a fan in the audience. We decided to feature it anyway. Not sure if you know this project, Robin Stam. He's a great artist. And he had this, sorry. I got myself a little confused there. The bridges that you see on the 10-euro note, They don't exist, which is just this perfect example of the bureaucratic hell of Europe. Let's feature these bridges that are fictional so no one can get upset, And then he decides to actually build them in Holland, and now we own the bridges of Europe, which is just fascinating, and we love that, so let's put it in. And then there's lots of stuff that didn't work. So I think I sent Peter, to his enormous credit, I think I sent him over 100 suggestions before we came up with these 6. Obviously, you can see my personal passion for African men with colorful sweaters. And this Cosby sweater was really trending at the time, but I loved the Dutch designer that actually made all these sweaters by hand for each episode. But it was a little bit too fashionable. And then there was this beautiful art piece of the tank made with balloons. That was a great idea, but doesn't really work. More handsome men in colorful sweaters. And my personal favorite that didn't make it was these blue chairs that I once spotted in the middle of the desert of this really smart guy. In certain parts of Africa, they don't have furniture, so if you have a big party, you have to rent chairs. And this guy decided, how do I stand out, at parties? So he said, okay, I'm going to paint my chairs blue. So if there's a party, people can see they're my chairs. So that was a great idea, but we decided to skip it. And also, it's really difficult to make choices sometimes, because this month you're making a selection, you're thinking, oh, I love this, I love this, I love that. And then when you get into this territory, for instance, lights for Africa, it seems like there's an entire world of designers and architects designing lights for Africa. So it's really important that if you pick one, then you can't next month pick another. So what makes a good light is interesting. So we have a lot of stuff with solar lights, we have gravity lights, we have actually a really cool Kenyan boy, 10 years old, who made this lion light system that repels the hyenas that are trying to eat his cows. And then the one project that we ended up selecting is the Mali light by an Italian architect named Matteo Ferroni. And I will be interviewing him live on stage in 2 weeks here in Amsterdam. So if you're really interested in lights in Africa and the production, that's a very interesting talk. So making choices is important. And then after doing 2 issues, we can now post-rationalize the criteria that we use for this section. Basically, we know that it can be the new and the old and the current as long as it's valid, and it can be made by anyone. So it's a designer or a doctor, a houseman. Watch how I casually picked the houseman, not the housewife. It can be analog or digital, and it does have to incite some kind of emotion with the reader. And obviously, main criteria, does it work? And there needs to be an overall balance. And someone asked me when we were doing this, how will you come up with topics? Because it seems like this is a hard project to spot, or it's a hard topic overall, the magazine. But we basically have all these readers out there, and they're traveling a lot. So if you see something that you think that could be really, really interesting for this section, please let me know. Because 7 articles every 3 months takes a lot of world travel for me to find them all, so tips are very welcome. And Peter will get back about this, but we are still looking for people who are flying to New York in the coming 6 weeks, but Peter will get into that.
I'll continue talking a bit about the content of the magazine, of the new issue, which is, it came out really a few days ago, so I suppose if you received it, would be today, and you probably didn't have a chance to look at it. I think the important question is about the choices, what fits in the magazine like this, and how the selection is made. A personal criterion that I put for myself would be, what kind of story would you want to share with your friends who are not designers if you're talking about design-related subjects? And often it would not be, scripting, it will not be a typeface, it will not be talking about logos. You'll talk about basic ideas, very basic things that you deal with, things that work or don't work, and we focus on the ones that do work. So in the first issue of the magazine, in an editorial, I would propose, the idea like, well, what would make this story? It's essentially about narration, about storytelling. It's the most fundamental technique for many journalists. Is that the storytelling is, something that will survive. The form may change, the form of reading may change, but the storytelling will, it's something that is lasting. It will not go away. In the first issue, we had this story. So in this issue, we had a story about the urinals at Schiphol Airport, and I've spoken about it, and it's a bit of an urban legend almost. That most of the men here will probably know it. The women here probably would not see it. But so there is such a thing as this etched fly in a men's bathroom at Schiphol Airport, and which makes people, the men, which are very focus oriented, if they see a target, they go for it. In the new issue, I wanted to continue start where we ended in the last issue. So the story starts at Schiphol Airport again. So in the new issue, we talk about this photograph captures many things that will go on in the issue. It talks about the densely populated area of the Netherlands, and Schiphol is one of the most densely populated areas in this country and worldwide. It will talk about the Boeing 747, which is this plane, which you see on the photograph. And there's this piece. Piece written by Kester Frederiks, the person who don't want to disturb right now, and which discusses the troubles of the situation right now that the urban environment around Schiphol Airport is so densely populated, and every second and a half there's a plane landing or taking off from Schiphol Airport. Obviously, it will disturb people, and it is amazing that there are many things they can do about it. They can regulate. You can choose any of the taking off runways, so how to control it, and look at the weather forecast and see how you can possibly remove the noise pollution. But there's a really incredible idea that came out from many people. First from ancient farmers, that they realized that sometimes in the winter there's more noise than early in spring. And why is that? It's because when you work with the earth, and the earth is not really flat and frozen, it tends to absorb noise. And some people have noticed it, and we feature a story and a story of artist that how a piece of land art can possibly affect Paul de Kort, the land art artist, would propose manipulating the landscape around Schiphol Airport, and which would effectively reduce the noise pollution around the airport. It's a work in process that you can see, but it's not completely finished, and it will turn out into in public park, so we can read about this. From this on, the story of the content of the issue is kind of interlinked. That there are loose ends how one article connects to another one, and always when you see this plane which is there, which is Boeing 747, we would have, this is how the noise pollution works. That if you have these wedged shapes, they tend to disturb the ground noise pollution, the planes where they're taking off, and it reduces by a certain number of decibels, which is required to, and the plan is to reduce it by 10 decibels, if I'm correct, right? The next story we have, and it comes right after it, is obviously connected. The most common plane at Schiphol these days that lands, owned by KLM, is the Boeing 747. And it's a plane that it's an icon of modern age. Most of you might have seen it. It has this typical bulge, it's a plane made in the 60s, and incredibly enough, it survived until today. We tend to think that the progress is so fast that we need to use the latest. And this particular plane, designed in the late 60s, is still one of the most popular planes around. And there are many reasons for it. And we look at basically at its unexpected success, why it became so popular. It's a story written by Ed van Hinten, who's another author we are very lucky to be here now, who made the research and looks at the design process of designing something like this. It's a plane not designed by a single person, but by an incredible amount of engineers and teams of people. And in order to make a plane like this, a complete factory would have to be built, because a Boeing 747 was, at the time when it was made, twice the size of the previously largest plane. By making it, you would have to make a completely new factory to do it. So the Boeing 747 would be the largest plane made at the time, and the largest building in the world would have to be built in order to build the plane itself, which is kind of crazy. And the story like this would allow us to look really at the consequences of people are familiar with these kind of objects, but they don't know really the story. So I think after reading something like this, next time you sit on a plane, you probably think or look differently around you, like what really takes to make something like this. And what was really unusual about it, that at the time when Boeing designed the plane, they didn't really believe in the future of this particular airplane. Everyone thought that supersonic planes would be the future, and this was supposed to be basically cargo airlines. And all the proportions of the plane would be built around the container, cargo container, because it would be made really for transporting goods. And obviously, in the line of the editorial policy how we had, the next story talks about containers. So we slowly go like stories which are interlinked, and we looked at design of an object which is so simple that you don't you don't notice it. You don't talk about that someone would have to design it. The containers existed for 150 years, but only the last 50 years they've been standardized, and the standardization process completely changed the world upside down. It made the world possible as we know it today. The containers which you see on these pictures, they are so-called the 40 feet containers. They are the most common size which is used in transportation, and they're called intermodal containers because they can be loaded on ships, on trucks, on anywhere, on planes. So everything is built around these sizes. Prior standardizing these containers, things would have to be loaded one by one on ships. And 97% of price on shipping would be on loading and unloading of these ships. So invention of these containers or standardization of the intermodal containers would effectively make the transportation completely, it would reduce it by 97%. It would change completely, the jobs which are available, because I don't mean only jobs in shipyards, but also jobs in any other industry, like in factories, in car factories around. They would not have to, produce everything on location, but it would rely a lot more on transportation. It's a single invention which would probably have the most impact on you, on what you wear today, what objects you have in your pocket, because suddenly it became affordable to use things which come from anywhere in the world. It's a story written by an economist, Mark Levinson, which is, and it's a quite intriguing story of, the slow transformation of the world and the beginning of globalization. And whatever you think of it, you just see the roots and see how design made it possible. But there's also a different kind of trade beyond, the global, big ships full of containers. There's also trade that happens outside of all that. And it became another story in the magazine which follows it right after. It's a story of this building. It's a building in Hong Kong called Chungking Mansions. And if you've been to Hong Kong, Chungking Mansions is one of the cheapest hostels. So I think young people, when they travel to Hong Kong, they tend to stay there. And anyone with, if you don't have much money, would look for places like this.
If you've never seen Chungking Mansions in Hong Kong, you should go, because you'll be amazed. It consists of probably the most globalized number of people in the world. I've counted 130 different nationalities there. And its major function is for what I call low-end globalization. People buy, African traders, Indian traders, Pakistani traders buy mobile phones, clothing, furniture, all kinds of things in this building and take it back to their home countries via container or often in their own luggage. I estimate that 15 to 20% of the mobile phones now used in sub-Saharan Africa have come through this one building. People always think about globalization in terms of big corporations with their billions of dollars and batteries of lawyers. But that's not the way most of the world experiences globalization. most of the world experiences globalization in terms of, individual traders coming back with a few hundred mobile phones, or, items of clothing wrapped up in their luggage or in their battered containers and so on. That's what globalization is for 80% of the world's people. So you don't need an elaborate theory for that. That's what globalization is, and most people in the developed world don't know it.
We don't need to walk through this. This was Gordon Matthews, an anthropology professor in the university, in Chinese University in Hong Kong, and we spoke to him and made this article, which deals with single building. It's very rare that anthropologists would look at the building as a source of research, and Gordon Matthews would be very serious about it, and he would stay in every single room of this building to be able to write on it. He wrote a book, and he would interview. Inside this building, there are all these little shops, which you've seen in this little video. There are restaurants, there are these cheap hostels. They all kind of service this money exchange service, hairdressers, anything you can think about it, prostitutions, anything really that it happens to be inside one single building. What is amazing is that for some reason, a lot of African traders come to Hong Kong. The reason is that there's no visa obligations for Africans to travel to Hong Kong, and they would come with suitcases, load them by mobile phones, and travel back and do it on a weekly basis, and would create this channel which would bring about 20 million phones from one single building to Africa, and would control, say in Kenya, 80% of the market with mobile phones is controlled in this route by a few traders which organize this transportation. And there are all kinds of phones, from fake ones to refurbished phones to the original ones. Whatever the demand is, they would be able to cater it. So it's a nice juxtaposition of the globalization as we know it, and then alternative routes of how people experience globalization in developing world. Since this article deals a lot about smuggling and how people basically go around as smuggling as basically a distribution method for the business, we look at another subject on the article is this, which I don't know if you're familiar with. This is example from Pakhuis d'Or. It's a culinary competition that takes place every couple of years in Lyon, in France. It's basically Olympics for foodies, for chefs. It's so serious. It's basically like a World Cup for culinary arts. People, in order to be chef in there, you need to qualify for national rounds, and then the continental rounds, and then finally you can make it to 24 selected chefs, which meet in one place. By itself, it's an interesting story, but what we did is we did not look only at the art of cooking, but we were interested in also how people organize the cooking. So many people create their replica cuisine, because this is live cooking. These chefs come there and they have to do in 4.5 hours. They have to cook the meal of their lifetime, and they have to impress the jury. And there's a live audience of thousands of people who are cheering loud, and it looks like a football match. It's very tough. People spend thousands, 100,000, even millions of dollars in rehearsing for this. This is how serious it is. It's a serious business. And we looked, again, not at in traditional, I read a lot about it, but traditionally, articles about Pakhuis d'Or focus on trying to describe what people eat and how it tastes and how it looks, and it's always amazing. But I was interested in the process of how do you prepare for something like this? And especially, the interesting part is that if you chef from, from Sri Lanka, or from, some strange country, how do you, bring your own local ingredients and trying to cook in France to impress the jury of, the international jury, which are not used to particular flavors, and they're not, you cannot really cook from local ingredients because you don't really know the French ingredients, so you have to bring basically your own ones, which is illegal. You cannot really bring your own crab and fish from Africa to cook. So I was particularly interested in this basically smuggling again of chefs that have to happen in order to cook these delicious meals, and no one really discusses. And we did interviews, and these chefs were surprisingly open about it. The basic techniques that they do have to smuggle these goods past customs, and this is basically the essential skill to be able to win. It's a question of winning or losing. They would have to have backup plans, if things are discovered and confiscated. So we talk about again the bringing stuff to this competition. And it's a writer, Barbara Eldridge, who wrote in the first issue about these visual translator guides. She made the research about this, making interviews with chefs, making interviews with custom officials about what is allowed, what is disallowed, and covering in this article, which is again, I think, quite interesting. Besides this kind of continuous storytelling, and I think the only metaphor that I can think of it is again the dinner story. That you come, you start talking about something, and people connect, and you talk about something relevant, but still different and hopefully interesting. So this magazine is basically a dinner amongst friends, which discuss interesting things, and it's being recorded in the magazine. There are a few interruptions in the magazine, things which are not really fitted in the main theme, and it's not so strictly connected. But they still make it because even these interruptions are interesting. And one of them is a story from the 60s from Czechoslovakia. This is basically where I was born. And if you know geography of Europe, you see Czechoslovakia is this country which doesn't exist anymore, separated into two. But it used to be the most centrally located country in Europe, which means basically that it does not have any access to the sea. What do? All other countries profit from being close to ports and being able to go on holidays on coastlines. And if you were from Czechoslovakia at that time to go to the sea, the closest route would be going down via Austria, Italy to Adriatic Sea. But in the 60s and 70s, you could not do it because there would be different political regimes, and you could not enter from communist Czechoslovakia directly to Austria and Italy. So you have to go around, and you spend 3 days traveling and to get to the Adriatic coast. So what solution would come to this would be to make a tunnel under Austria, which would be quite amazing. You think it comes from science fiction movies, but it's a serious project, which would be discussed on official levels with President of Austria and with all the involved parties. There would be everything, financing would be discussed, and the project didn't happen. If it would have happened back then, it would be opened this year, which was a nice anniversary. It never did. It was an ingenious idea of a 480-kilometer tunnel under the whole country, under the Alps, and it's also a story of Cold War, a story of how what made it impossible was basically the Russian involvement, which didn't really like the idea where people are digging out. What kind of you were digging out of one regime to another, and it was not really well considered. But again, we would find original materials and would manage to back up and document the story. We would work with a BBC correspondent stationed in Prague, Rob Cameron, who would cover the story and would manage to find as much as he could in the archives to be able to discuss things like this. And again, this is what Anna mentioned, that it's not only the latest, newest ideas, but often many ideas are forgotten. And I think they're worthwhile to look back into because it's not always focused on just the latest, newest things, but things which are just really inspiring. Besides the long-form essays which we have in the magazine, there are also shorter contributions, and often these photo contributions which deliver the points visually. So not describing in words, but just in a couple of photographs with long captions describing stories, which again they cannot be really described differently. This is a story about all kids play, everyone plays, but some kids are more fortunate than others, and some kids can buy footballs, and some kids, they have to make their own ones. So this is a story from different African countries, kids which create their own footballs, and often they're made from condoms, because this is what is freely available in Africa thanks to humanitarian help, thanks to all the AIDS help. So these kids would just wrap these condoms in clothes and plastic bags, use a bit of yarn to do it, and create balls which last a couple of days. But they can do it, in 15 minutes they can make a new one. The photographs coming from Jessica Hiltout, photographer who traveled around Africa documenting these balls and the process of making them. We have another photo story and possibly another contributor here, not sure. Hans Wilsgoed, that photographed phone towers in South Africa which are disguised as trees. And if you count how many of them, they make the largest tree in the world, the largest man-made tree, because there's so many of them. Of course, people don't like, having their phone tower full of receptors and transmitters close to their houses, and they feel a lot better about it when they don't look like one. So these photographs just, showing the objects. And in the small captions, it just explain how the companies who specialize in creating these camouflage phone towers. Anna has mentioned Matteo Ferroni, an Italian architect who worked in Mali and created this recycled bicycle lamps. So from recycled bicycle, he would create lamp. It's a long story which I don't really want to get into, but in Mali, which is an Equatorian country, you have very long nights, 12-hour nights, and people have to get up in the middle of the night and do their work. If you a butcher, for example, there's no other way that you can only operate at night. And how do you do your work if you don't really have a public light system? People would use the small petrol lanterns, which are very dangerous. And he would observe this and come up with a different solution. And he'll come in 2 weeks to Amsterdam to talk about it. So you could join for this discussion as well. So this is the content of the second issue. And I'll talk briefly about something which, coming back again to the invisible part. So from things which you see to things which you don't see in a magazine. And that's really the distribution, the production, the financing. The distribution part has been, I spoke about it a few times. 10 years ago, I started a magazine called It started in 2000, so 13 years ago. It was a traditional art design magazine. And at the time, I would be luckily naive enough to start a magazine together with a friend of mine, Stuart Bailey. We would have had no idea what it takes to make a magazine. We would come up with content. And only when it was printed, think well, what do we do with this? How do we get it to shops? We would have to approach book distributors, and we learn slowly and painfully what it is. It's a serious trade, and these book distributors are very good in creating connections with bookstores, and then with different countries you need to create different networks, and so often you use different international partners, and then in other places, in another territory, which is a different language territory, would work with different partners. So slowly there are many different parts involved in getting publication from shop to the publisher, other way around. And for example, if you wanted to sell this magazine in the US, we would have to pay 82% of the cover price to the distributor. So 18% of the cover price would come back to us, which we would pay for all the production, all the content, all the printing, and stay with we would have 18% less, which is almost not worth doing it. When we decided to do Works at Work, it was clear that I did not want to go the same way. And again, there's nothing wrong with this distribution, but you're looking for the most direct way to approach the public. You're trying to create a community, trying to create public which is interested, and hopefully trying to cut the middle part to make it as effective as possible. And this is the proposal.
Works That Work wants to examine often ignored areas of design. In the spirit of this aim, we also intend to bypass traditional distribution networks, which typically take the largest part of the cover price, as well as control where the publication will be sold and at what price. Instead, we would like to deepen our relationships with our readers and make them partners in this enterprise. We call this social distribution. Let's see how it works. A reader based, for example, in Buenos Aires knows a lovely bookstore in his town that could be a good place to sell a magazine. He first contacts the bookstore, and if they're interested, he then contacts us. The next time he or one of his friends travels to one of our magazine hubs, he buys copies of the magazine at a 50% discount. He in turn sells the magazines to the bookstore at 60 to 75% of the cover price, so the reader's profit is 10 to 25% of the cover price. He sends information about the store to us, and we publish it on our website, driving other potential readers to the store. This distribution process supports local bookstores, involves readers as partners and agents of the magazine, ensures that all the parties get paid, and frees us up to focus on what we do best, publishing the magazine.
Right. At the time when we made it, we didn't really know. It was a proposal. We didn't really know how it would work. It sounded, to my simple mind, very, very trivial. Trying to be as close as possible and trying to cut, all the middle parts and get as close as possible to the readers. It did work. I have to say that it did work. And in fact, there's something great about. I mean, it's a lot of fun to create a publication, but the real satisfaction comes from getting the feedback to it, to the publication, not only on content, but also on running the magazine. The distribution methods worked in a way that we would manage to get the publication to places which would probably never be catered by traditional distribution. We would sell it in artist communities and schools, and not really real shops, in just places where people meet, in communal places. There are some shops as well. So it was surprising to see that where people wanted to see the magazine, which was great. The great thing was that it didn't really compete with any traditional distribution, because I learned that a lot of the bookstores have agreements with distributors, and they could not really take something outside of that circle. So I was really glad that I didn't know about it, that we don't have to compete with this, but you can find different distribution places which would not normally be covered by distribution. What the reader made it also possible is that they came up with this, saying like, well, if your idea is to get as close as possible to the reader, between publisher and reader, the bookstore is also just one thing in the middle that doesn't really need to be there. And this never occurred to me. I thought like, well, bookstore just needs to be there. So what happened more and more is that the people would, just get their magazines for their friends and for themselves. We offer these 50% discount if you take 7 or 10 copies of the magazine. And people are like, well, that's a cheap way to get it for my friends. So we would not make profit with it, but we just distribute it to a group of people. We would see kind of informal readers clubs happening, popping up in different places. This is one happening in Brazil, where we sold an incredible amount of copies, just informally. People would meet in bars, and they would just agree to take a box of magazines. And again, the idea of the social distribution will be to motivate the readers to do the distribution job for us. They didn't really care about making the profits. They cared about getting it the best price possible. So they use the discount which we give them to just share it amongst their friends, which is fair enough and even great. I never hoped that this would happen. So this was basically an extension of the same idea that came out of readers. Something I wouldn't probably never think of by myself. So this is the really nice part of it, that people feel engaged and part of it, and improve things which are already there. One of the reasons why we do want to organize occasionally these I don't know it's how to call it, presentations, meetings, is that it does blur the boundary between what normally this is set between writer and reader, between publisher and and consumer. There's no such thing. So the contributor and or the maker and these boundaries are completely blurred.
How many copies did you spread?
The first issue, so this one was printed in 3,000 copies. I think we sold half of it online through our website, and the other half in this kind of informal methods. I think maybe 200 in normal shops, and most of them like are really in these informal gatherings. So again, I mean, the reason why I'm really glad that people come and so we can talk about, how basically readers are part of the magazine and they're essential part of the magazine, because otherwise it's not really worth doing it. And there are different ways, how people are part of the magazine. Just talking about it, what they see, if they like it, but also, luckily, I was amazed how people who read it are usually very smart people, and they know some things much better than we do. So they become contributors. In the second issue, I know, or in the third one, it's the readers that become contributors, because they know things that we don't. We operate on a really tight budget, but we do pay all contributors their fair part. And we cannot really afford to travel to source our content. So that's why it's amazing that, to work with people who travel already and to use their journeys to make the magazine. To talk about these places where you can possibly get the magazine, or suggestions where you could get them. But also, I became now known that when people travel, tell me like, well, I'm going to Moscow next week. Do you want to take the magazines there? And we always use this. So we always look for people traveling to Brazil, because we have these amazing contacts there that they need like still more magazines. We need to get them to New York. And, instead of paying so much for shipping and making the magazine expensive, we're using the spare space in luggage of people to get them there. It takes a lot more logistical organizing to get things there. When we brought it last time to Brazil, Lucas, who's here, he would bring it to Lisbon. From Lisbon, it would fly to Rio de Janeiro. From Rio, it would go by bus to Sao Paulo, where finally it would reach its destination. And it's just by willingness of people, it would reach the people who would be very happy to get his box and make it, again, cheaper, rather than paying for all the cost of transportation. So make it magazine affordable. We would sell magazines in Russia, in India, in Brazil this way, which otherwise would probably be too expensive. So these are all the way that basically improve the magazine. And again, basically the readers improve the magazine. Thank you. I think this. We have some magazines here if you'd like to have a look, but I wanted to give first copies of magazine to our contributors, which is Kester Frederiks, Paul de Kort, and Ed van Hinte. Can I give you the first copies of the magazine? Sure. Please. If there are questions, of course, Anna and I are more than happy to answer. Otherwise, we'll end up having drinks downstairs. So it's your choice if there are questions. And I want to see if there's something.
Would you still continue to print this magazine without printing, just the digital version for the stories? Or will there always be a printed version as well?
Yeah, the question was if we continue, there's a microphone. The question was if we would continue making printed publication if there would not be any interest in print only. Again, it was my secret hope that there would be interest in print. And at the moment, if I just looked recently at statistics, I think 80% of sales are from print and only 20% from digital editions. So people making this choice to read it on paper, or to preserve it, or to make it accessible because, I don't know, it's handier. There's still people who want to read it online, which is fine. If the ratio would change, I don't really know. I mean, it is fairly expensive, of course, to produce. And of course, if you do a magazine today, it has to be well produced. It has to be well considered. I think it's well designed. It's beautifully printed. It's one of the best printers, which makes it, of course, expensive. But we thought, like, if you do print things, it cannot be just, to have it materialized. It has to be, something which has value on its own. So I think there's attention to details, and it shows things which are impossible to show also in digital media. So I think the content is slightly different in print and digital. You find, more photographs in ebooks because there's no restriction on space. But in print, you show a lot more details, and photography is usually stunning in print. So we start differentiating what goes where. And one day, if you would allow it, we would maybe edit it even more so. It would be even more separate. They would have like more video content for electronic editions and different content for print editions. We'll see what happens. I'll probably leave a mic so people hear what you. If you want to.
What about the method of like print on demand?
I've looked at it, and the results are not particularly impressive. If you print on demand, that means it's a fairly cheap way to print on demand. But if I see in the publications, yes, they are printed. Are they beautiful? Are they convincing? Do they provide this additional value that digital publication cannot do? I don't really think so. The design process, it takes a couple of weeks to prepare it to the format that it is. It takes incredible effort from the printer to optimize all the images and to make it really impressive on paper. And the printing has to be it has to be really good. So we didn't find a method that could do it. If we do find a way to do it, of course we'd be happy to explore it. But at the moment, the print on demand is less than optimal for this magazine.
Can I ask you about the research methods? How do you do research with given topic?
It's surprisingly unscientific. There's no. Usually there's something that you're really interested in. I've heard once about this tunnel in Czechoslovakia, but I didn't really know if it was true or not. I didn't know where I could find information. And it starts with the seed of an idea. It starts with something basic, and you first start asking about it if it's really worth the effort. So I would do preliminary research myself if there's enough information to make it into something. And if I'm convinced that it is, then we look for a person to cover the subject. And we look for someone who is usually close enough, is sufficiently informed, and is able to write about it. So for first and second issue, most of the content came really from us, that we would have the topics which we wanted to cover. But it's already changing. The idea, the lights in Mali, which I showed, this Matteo Ferroni, this was the only piece which was not really proposed by our editorial team, but came from outside, came from a reader. Said well, do you know this and that? And we didn't. We wrote a proposal, and the writer who wrote it, she was actually a very skilled writer, and would be delivering the article, and we would work with the authors on photographs. It comes from different places. A lot, unfortunate enough that I happen to travel quite a lot, so many things come across by being on places and being amazed how different people solve their problems. Being in India, see how people go about something very simple, and would be inspiring. But now, again, I think by making the magazine a bit more open, by using the community, we're able to source the content from more places, which is, basically this is the research. And we work with more people, so usually an article would be not just written, but would be fact-checked and researched, and it's a work, it's a journalism work that we have to do, the homework. And then finally we work with photographers to be able to document it. There's also recently a thing that we start using more and more. It's a website called pitchme.org, which is basically freelance writers being able to propose ideas for different magazines, and editors come there and basically shop around and can basically buy articles which would be written for them. We did it once, and it worked fairly well. We might do it again. That you see just little blurbs, and you can basically invest into it and ask them to write the whole article if you basically pay for research and writing. But all contribution is paid for.
I actually had the same question that she had, but I had one comment and one question. My comment was that I'm actually really glad that a printed version that's really well taken care of is also being published, because it's a really valuable object to have, and I gladly read that. So I hope that you keep that as well. And actually, the other question was about, well, how do you do the research, and how do you also, as an editor, how do you make the choices? What's valuable enough to show? But I guess you sort of answered that question already.
But a lot of it is also gut feeling. Just you know what makes it. What triggers your attention? What would you tell to your friends? And I think of my closest circle. Is it something I would really want to tell my friends about? And if it's yes, then we want to know more about it and see how much space we give it to. We don't really come up with arbitrary limits of should it be 1,000 words or 10,000 words article. We just see how much space does it need? How much photographs does it need? How big can we make it? And so we adjust it based to what story offers rather than what space we have available. So.
Yeah, but I can also imagine that in the beginning you can fairly easily fill the first and 2 editions of a magazine. But I'm actually, by the way you explain now how you actually do your research, I'm actually really curious as to what it means when you have the 5th edition of the magazine and when you're maybe out of ideas, and if you maybe have 10 contributors with different ideas, and how do you then make the choices, and how do you then
usually it's not so difficult. If you see the material, you're able to see what is stronger stuff and what makes it more valuable. One thing I notice in most of my work is that once you start, you don't run out ideas. Ideas multiply. They multiply based on because you meet more people, you're able to discuss with more people, so you're just having more and more stuff rather than running out of sources. So I see it now already that the list which I made already they expanded many times over, and also being able to speak to really good people. And so the 3rd issue, which will come out around Christmas, there's a mini theme of design which is made for extremely long terms. Longer than you ever imagine, longer than one's lifetime, much longer than one's lifetimes. For example, thinking of nuclear waste storage, which has to be stored for 100,000 years. How do you design something like this? So the theme of time became a mini topic, and then I would usually start by explaining this basic idea to a few people, and from this you start hearing well, do you know about this and that, and it just grows.
You're talking about telling the stories to non-designers, but do you also know if this magazine is being read more by non-designers than designers? I meet people sometimes, but of course I don't know how indicative it is, that you meet people that are not designers. I received a number of emails of a graphic designer or industrial designer buying a magazine and saying I need to get another copy because my friend who is a surgeon took it from me and he doesn't want to return it. It does happen. Or my wife, who is, doing something different, was enjoying it so much that he just gave it as a present. So we hear this, and I'm very happy that it does happen, that there's enough that these are essential, stories which can interest anyone who is curious. And I see it does happen. For some reason, it started, my own circle of people that I know. There are many designers amongst the circle. But I think the magazine, how it's designed, how it's prepared, how it's treated, is that I think it has the potential to go beyond the design field, and hopefully it will. There was a question via Twitter. They say, do you think quarterly independent magazines are trend or a fade? I have no idea. Well, we don't do quarterly. You see, we come twice a year. So, and twice a year is basically what, it's not, as you can gather, I'm not making my living with this magazine. Hopefully, maybe one day I will, but I'm doing it next to, running a design studio together with Johanna, my wife. And this is what I can do at the moment, what we can do, next to other things. Independent magazines, there is a trend to do something, small magazines, but I have no comment on it. I don't really know what we're talking about.
magazines, I teach in art school, and a lot of people say, like, well, I want to do a magazine, I want to make a book, and we ask them, what do you want to say? And they realize that they don't really want to say anything, they want to make a magazine. And it's usually the other way around, you need to have something to say before you can make a magazine or a book. So again, I don't think about the formats before you have, a message to deliver. So I wouldn't know.
Exactly my question. I was curious, but I think I got the answer. You started this off as an idealistic project, or as something to earn money with, or both?
Purely for the money. Now, of course, I would not want to lose money with this. So, idealistic, it is something. It became a vehicle by which I can learn a great deal, and I'm really enjoying it. That talking to people, learning about stuff I never heard about, it's amazing, and it provides a value beyond the money. So I'm really glad to do it next to my work, because it makes, I think, people in the age, I've been running a design studio for some time. I'm 40 now, and you get to a position which is quite comfortable, and you get you can keep doing it and become better and expert in something, and being very safe about it. And one way is to grow, and one way is to learn new things. I would like to learn new things, and the magazine is a project that allows to learn new things. I didn't really have a business plan. I hoped I would not lose money. Luckily, it happened that so far we break even. Again, if you pay for my time, I would be very happy. If I make a fortune, I would be even happier. I don't know if it will ever happen, but right now it's not the top priority. The top priority right now is that there is a lot of enthusiasm and energy to make something like this. I can rethink it like a year or two from now. And again, it is important that there is a foundation behind it. There are people that they pay for the magazine, that we can make it possible, because it's an expensive hobby to do. And if I'd be losing money, I would not do it. So right now we break even.
Yeah, actually, I would like to add something to that, because
I think she needs a microphone.
Yeah, well,
she doesn't.
I got it. Yeah. So I've been writing about design for about 8 years. And Peter's actually the first one to pay me, which is kind of funny, because everything that I used to write for, they had advertisers, and big distribution models. And they always said, well, anything we can pay you is purely symbolic. And then they would say, well, we have €0. And I think that's really great that this magazine is paid for by the readers. Obviously, there's a great contribution from Peter, but that he also really tries to reward the people that are contributing, so the writers and the photographers, and everybody is treated very fairly. So I think that's really great.
That's personal experience as well. That I've written for different magazines and different media, and it's always amazing to find out how poorly the hard work, the research and writing is paid for. And of course you want to be heard, and it's exciting first time. But the second time it makes you think. You will probably less likely to do second time, and third time probably even less so. So I thought the only way to make it to do it is that we treat people how I'd like to be treated as well. That if someone does the serious research and writing and spends time interviewing people, they need to be remunerated. They need to be compensated for their efforts. If we use people's photographs, it's the same thing. So I would not feel comfortable enough to keep asking people for favors every time. So however small the budget is, we reserve the budget for the contributors, because that's the only way to do it, I think, on longer term. I think if this would be a one-off issue, maybe we could pull it off without paying people. But if you want to really do it seriously longer term, I don't think there's another way. Yeah.
Did you consider... Did you consider to bring content to these events also? Like performances, or even people that actually contribute to the content to come and speak?
Well, I did. This would be a more ambitious plan in the future. That if we could do a more ambitious plan, that we could have a specific things which don't work so well in the form of a magazine, but we could do it in a live event. Of course, that takes a bit more resources as well. So it's basically, you could think of it as another contribution, which is again paid for, prepared, and I imagine it could work very well. Right now, this is still early days for the magazine, and we're finding out how to work. Like it's all very steep learning lessons for, I think, for all of us, to find out how can you just continue doing it, and how a lot of things which you do right now are so different than how I imagined doing it 6 months ago. I never thought, like some of the ideas are completely different about the content, about the operations. So things change constantly. You just react to what is happening around. And again, we're using a lot of the enthusiasm of readers, that they come up with different plans, different ideas, and improvements. So this could possibly become a one. That it's like, how can this become more interesting? That you provide something which cannot exist in print, but use it in a live event. So.
Or just enriches the experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. The next one.
Yeah, maybe also we're on the 16th of July. We're going to be at Hub here in Amsterdam, and we're going to be interviewing Matteo with the Lights from Mali. He's coming to Amsterdam especially for this, so if you know anyone that would be interested to come. So that's an example where we do the live interview on stage, and in the future I can imagine that actually the interview on location provides the content for the magazine, so now it's kind of more of a personal meet and greet with the author. And but he has a really exciting project, so it'd be nice to see live.
Which is in line what you're suggesting. So this is a bit of a coincidence that it happened, but it's basically bringing it to life, something that you can read about, that you can meet the person, talk about the project, which you may raise questions. There's one more question. Volker will.
You mentioned that you have to make up like a new or your own publication platform to be able to make something for both digital and paper. Can you tell something more about that, like the process around it?
I mentioned that I work in design and I work a lot with typography, and one thing I learned working with type and design is that often I need tools which don't exist. And in type design, because it's such a specific field, my friends and I would create our own tools for anything. I'm working, for example, on Arabic fonts. Imagine there's no tool on the Macintosh that you can create Arabic fonts. It's just impossible. So you would spend a time to create a tool that allows doing it. For this magazine, so I would again ask around like what tool allows doing this. I didn't find anyone. There must be. I imagine there are proprietary tools of big publishers that may be used for newspapers, but I didn't find anything already made that I could license or buy and use it. So the decision was made. Well, we'll make something specific for us. It became primarily made to make this magazine possible. But as a byproduct, it will become available on its own. It will be called Editor, and we're working on it. It will become a tool that will license to other people, and because it can possibly be useful for other publishers, which they have a print and web or ebook operations and need to be able to export it. And again, it's a good way to collaborate on text. It's a good way to, it has its own markup system, markdown system, so you can annotate. It's a good way to comment things, exchange comments. And finally, it's a single click of a button to export, for example, to InDesign or to HTML or to ebook, which normally is a painful process to transform. So it's based completely natively. So I would expect, if things go well, as I expect, that end of the year we'll probably publish the publishing system. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. If you want to see the magazine, it's there in the back. Indra's waiting for you. And tonight, special price, €10. And if you leave your email, you can get the free digital edition as well, which we'll email to you. And otherwise, we'll have drinks downstairs. Yeah? Thank you.
It's easier announcing your intentions. Easier